This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is Emily, host of Beauties and Headcanons here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come and check out my show, Beauties and Headcanons, where we talk about nerdy theories, games, TV shows, books, movies, you name it. We're here to talk nerdy to you. A new show comes out every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Throughout history, the course of sports has been shaped by one thing: the fans. From the moments you never dreamed of,
Bobby Wilkins has saved the USA's life in this World Cup! Hall, the runner! Loose ball! It's good! Gonzaga! The flipper still fits!
to the moments that still give you nightmares.
Behind the bag! It gets through Buckner! Here comes Knight and the Mets win it! He's in! Patriots win the Super Bowl! Brady has his fifth!
Through the good and the bad, fans have helped change the games we watch and the players we love. They may not be the most logical people.
You are a factory of sadness! I'll see you Sunday.
But they know their teams better than anybody.
They'll blow in the ninth.
You may not always see them, but you know where to find them.
After all, there's nothing quite like the view from the cheap seats.
Broadcasting as part of the Public House Media Network,
Grab a chair and enjoy all there is in the cheap seats.
Welcome everybody to the best place you could possibly ask to watch a sporting event, not right behind home plate, not 50-yard line in Dallas, not even sitting sideline next to Jack Nicholson in Los Angeles. If you really want to know what's going on in the world of sports, you got to come up here to the cheap seats. I'm Christian Heimall, joined in a moment by my good buddy Jon Lauder. Welcome to the maiden voyage of this 3-day-a-week sports podcast here on the Public House Media Network. I want to give you all a brief idea of what this show is going to be about. As much as we love the hard-hitting and the exciting stuff of the people right there in the locker room, the best banter in sports happens at a bar, happens all the way in the last row of the bleachers, happens all the way in the parking lot, tailgating, or even after the game. We represent those fans, and we are going to bring you some of the best banter you could possibly ask for with regards to some of the hottest topics in sports. They may not always be about what's going on the field or on the court, but you can certainly bet you will be entertained, and we certainly appreciate you all spending time here. As I mentioned, my name is Christian Heimall. I am the producer of Press Row. I'll be one of your hosts here on Mondays. I'm also the host and producer of another sports podcast that you may know of here on Public House Media, entitled Press Row, and I thank you guys so much if you've ever checked that show out. Happy to have you guys here as well now on Mondays. And as I mentioned, joined by a really good friend of mine. We're going to be here with you guys every Monday. Known him now for, hard to believe, but almost a decade. A good buddy of mine, Jon Lauder.
Christian, you know what? You're really trying to get people to listen to Press Row because you just said it twice instead of saying the cheap seats. So you're really trying to get people to listen to that. But look, there's no question that the cheap seats are the best place to go. Now, in terms of, things like, tailgates and stuff like that, when you're eating equestrian fecal matter like Philadelphia fans, that's a little bit too far. So we're not going to go that far, but we are going to give you our best interpretations of sports from a wide-angle lens.
And to be 100% honest, if this show had been debuting a week ago, that actual footage would have been a topic of discussion on the show, which is a little unfortunate. But I mean, the city of Philadelphia, congratulations to them, even though they basically kind of embarrassed the sports world with their celebration of their Eagles' first ever Super Bowl championship. But Johnny, I mean, I want to kind of toot our own horn a little bit here, because the last time you and I hosted a show together was December 23rd of 2013. We were hosting a show on WFAN in New York, the number one sports radio station in the world. And that was because, and to toot our own horn a little bit, we were a finalist for the WFAN Fan Phenom contest, the first and, as far as I know, the only duo to reach the finals of that contest.
We were the only ones, and now almost 5 years later, we're talking to each other in our basements. So we're really hitting it hard, and we've really improved our stock. But no, that was a great time. It was really cool. the fact that we were able to sit up with the sports pope himself, and now he's, the sports bishop or whatever now, since he's not at the Fan anymore. But yeah, that was a really cool experience, and I'm excited to get back to, doing what we love, which is talking sports together.
Well, then let's get right into it then here. As we are here on Monday of President's Day, February 19th, and All-Star Weekend for the NBA this past weekend. They're still on the break. No games until Thursday, John, which gives us a great chance to kind of talk about where things sit in the NBA right now. And probably the biggest story, one of the biggest stories at least going into the All-Star break, was the Houston Rockets, a 10-game win streak, now sitting ahead of the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference.
Yeah, now look, I'm not sure how many people in the cheap seats, the overweight people drinking their 8 beers are looking up advanced offensive and defensive statistics, but this is not our first rodeo. I looked up some of the advanced metrics because I am a loser, and the Rockets are second in offensive rating, they're 9th in defensive rating, and they're one of only 4 teams to be in the top 10 in both. Now, what does all that jargon tell you? It tells you that they're a complete team, both offensively and defensively. 7 different players averaging in double figures. They've been tremendous. Mike D'Antoni, we know he's had his ups and downs. He had the 15 seconds or less with Phoenix. He had the terrible garbage dumpster fire that was the New York Knicks. So he's been up and down. Lakers, it's been all over the place, but he's got the perfect team right now. And with Chris Paul and James Harden, when they're on the court together, they're 28-1. So Houston has been incredible. For anybody to have a better record right now than the Warriors, I don't think anybody expected that. As good as we all knew Houston could be, to be at this point, this deep into the season, because we're past the halfway point. It's not the halfway point. We're beyond that at this point. They're 23-6 at home. They're 21-7 on the road. The Rockets are a tremendous basketball team.
I think the part that really intrigues me about this squad is we talked about it at the beginning of the year. A lot of people discussed when the trade happened to get Chris Paul, how are he and James Harden going to work together? And as you said, 28-1 when they play together. But you look at the two of them, and really it's kind of Chris Paul recognizing that, hey, listen, if I'm going to get a ring, I got to let James Harden go out and be James Harden. 31.3 points a game, 9 assists a game. He's letting James Harden be the guy who was probably, for many people, the MVP of the league.
But we've seen this time and time again. We saw it in Miami. Dwayne Wade took a backseat to LeBron. Now, look, that first finals was kind of a disaster for them, but the fact that they got to the finals in their first year together was because of Dwayne Wade taking a backseat. When LeBron went back to Cleveland, Kyrie Irving, he was the top dog. He had to take a backseat. Now, of course, he wanted to be the number 1 option again, so now he's in Boston. We've seen this before. When you get a bunch of these players together, when you get one half of the banana boat together, you need to be able to mesh together, especially 2 ball-dominant players. Both Paul and Harden, they want the ball in their hands really at all times. And Paul's done a great job of moving himself back, giving Harden the ability to be the leader, to be the more ball-dominant player. And Harden's having one of the best all-around seasons we've seen, quite frankly.
I don't think anybody can argue that, but I mean, the other part is here, for me, you said both guys want to have the ball when it really matters, but who do you trust more? And I think more people, especially now, given his age, given the fact that James Harden can do so many different things with the basketball, they're going to rather have Harden taking those shots when it comes down to it. And you mentioned offensive numbers for this team, but I look at, and I've always been this way, a defensive guy, and when you compare them, because now everybody's talking about comparing them to the Rock or to the Warriors, is there concern for Golden State, a team now who, they lost their last game before the All-Star break, big. They've won 6 of their last 10. Okay, no big deal. They're still scoring 116 points a game, the Warriors are, but the Rockets are a team that is one of the better defensive teams, and there's only one stat that really matters, and that's the scoreboard, and they're outscoring opponents on average a little less than 9 points a game. They're playing better defense than Golden State is, and that, to me, is what really makes Houston a really interesting team here as we head towards the final couple months of the regular season. The fact that they're playing defense well enough where they're outscoring opponents pretty solidly, better than anybody else in the Western Conference right now, better than anybody in the NBA right now. And they're able to do it not only at home, but they're able to do it on the road, which is such a huge part, especially when it comes time for the playoffs.
And this is losing Patrick Beverley, who they traded to the Clippers as part of the deal for Chris Paul with like 19 other guys and, their trainer and a couple of guys that were selling beer. I mean, literally it was like 100 guys for one. But Paul has clearly helped them defensively, and that's the biggest difference. Even if Paul wasn't on the team, the offense was going to be top 10 because Harden is that good. Eric Gordon's been tremendous. Ryan Anderson, even though he's massively overpaid, has had a pretty good season. Clint Capella's getting double-doubles pretty much every single game. So
Clint Capella is the best shooting player in the NBA right now. He's shooting 65.5%. He's the best field goal percentage number in the NBA right now. It's been talked about very little, if at all, this season in their success.
Yeah, well, and it helps when it's basically just, over and over just games of NBA Jam where it's just like, whoa, and then they throw it up to him and he dunks at home. I mean, that's literally what his role is, and he's playing it to perfection. And in my opinion, there's nobody that even has a shot to take down Golden State except for Houston. They're by far the most complete team other than the Warriors. They're the only team that's got the combo of defense and offense and that transcendent player, that whole package to be able to mess with Golden State.
And here's the insane part. I mean, when we talk about Houston, we talk about James Harden. When you think of Harden now, you think of his ability to not only drive to the rim and get an incredible athletic basket, but also he was taking threes from 30 feet out the other night in one of their games. But you look at Houston as a team. We talk about Golden State with Klay Thompson and with Steph Curry and all these other guys. But I mean, you remember back when it was the Splash Brother, the Splash Brother group. We remember the guys over in Portland, the Trailblazers taking deep threes. Houston is a team that, John, this is a stat that blows my mind. They are taking 13.7 more threes a game than their opponent. 13.7 more threes. They're making just over 5 more threes a game than their opponent. In an era of the NBA that is dominated now by the outside shot, there is nobody doing it better than Houston. And you brought him up earlier. You can't really be surprised that it's Mike D'Antoni roaming the sidelines for this Houston squad.
Yeah, Red Auerbach is rolling over in his grave. I mean, it's insane just how many threes they're attempting. But you're right. That's the way the league is at this point. The league used to be an inside-out game. You looked at players all the way back, George Mikan to Russell to Chamberlain to Abdul-Jabbar to Bill Walton and on and on and all the way up to Shaq and David Robinson and Hakeem Olajuwon. That's just not the way the league is. At this point, a player like Jahlil Okafor, who was drafted in the top 2 of the NBA draft, he's been rendered completely obsolete. He's like a minus 20 in terms of, his plus minus. He can't even get off the bench for the Nets because that's just not the way the game is played at this point. It's from the outside in thanks to Steph Curry and James Harden, and you even go down to the college game with how many threes Villanova's attempting, Trae Young, on and on and on. You've got, 4-year-olds shooting from 35 feet out. I mean, this is the way basketball is. It's from the outside in now, and you've got to have players that can hit from the outside. And really, Golden State and Houston, they're the two teams that do the best job of shooting the three, and that's another big part of the reason why they're both so successful.
Now, that being said, I mean, we can go down the list and look at some of these teams that are competing, and we're talking Western Conference basketball here in the NBA on the cheap seats. Christian Heimall, John Lauder here with you. We can go down this list of Western Conference teams, John, and who could potentially pose a threat. I mean, right now it's obviously Houston and Golden State. Which one is actually going to win the West? We'll wait and see. But other than that, I mean, Minnesota's got an incredibly young core of guys that aren't exactly lighting it up from downtown. San Antonio isn't known as a three-point shooting team. The Thunder right now, outside of Russell Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony, who thinks when he wakes up he's in range, even though he's not. You look at those teams, they're not the dominant three-point shooting team, yet they're still competitive. San Antonio has always done this, and it gives real credit to Greg Popovich in the fact that they don't need to be a dominant three-point shooting team to still be a competitive team.
Well, right now, if you look at the other 6 teams that if the season ended today would make the playoffs, you've got San Antonio, who doesn't have enough firepower, and they have no idea if Kawhi Leonard's coming back. Minnesota, far too young. Portland basically is just 2 players in Lillard and McCollum, and they both need the ball. Denver, I'm amazed Denver's even in the playoffs right now, but that's how good Nikola Jokic is. But they're not there. No way. New Orleans lost Boogie Cousins, so they're just Anthony Davis and a bunch of dudes. The only real wild card to me would be Oklahoma City because of Westbrook and Paul George right now, my opinion, other than Kevin Durant, is the best two-way player in the league at the moment. His defense has been spectacular. His offense has also been really, really good. But in a lot of ways, I almost feel like they're too much like Westbrook and Durant were. There's just not enough there. Yes, Carmelo can get hot. Yes, Steven Adams has his moments. But they just lost Andre Roberson, who was their best defensive player other than Paul George. it's just not enough. And you look at all these teams, and you can almost say the same thing. It's not enough. It's not enough experience. It's not enough talent. All of these teams have really nice elements, but they don't have the complete package that Houston and Golden State do. That's why there's a clear delineation at the top of the West between those two and then everybody else.
It'll be real interesting to see how the second half, or the unofficial second half of the season begins here for both of these teams. You got coming up on Thursday, the Warriors hosting the Clippers, who have been an interesting discussion simply because they sold off a lot of guys despite not making a trade to get rid of DeAndre Jordan, maybe make themselves better, but they were part of a huge deal and a number of deals over deadline day a couple of weeks back, somehow still holding on to guys like DeAndre Jordan and Lou Williams.
Yeah, the Clippers are in a weird spot right now. They had their opportunity and just could not get it done in the playoffs, and Chris Paul took a lot of heat for that, and understandably so. And I think when you look at his legacy, I'm not saying he's not an all-time great player, but he could never take that team over the top as the leader, and kind of did himself sort of a Durant situation. Let's move on to a little bit of a better team. Yeah, the Clippers are in a weird spot. The Lakers and the Clippers are both in kind of a weird sort of in-between. Though the Lakers, of course, much better spot, tons of cap space coming up, some really nice young players. But yeah, the Clippers are a weird team. It seems like they might want to keep Lou Williams, but why? DeAndre Jordan shoots like negative 42% from the free throw line. He can't make a basket outside of 5 feet, and his arms are 5 feet long, so it's like he's not even really trying. He's a great defensive player, but he's a total liability on offense. What do you do with him? The Clippers are in a really, really weird spot right now.
Western Conference, a little bit in shock, the fact that you see the Houston Rockets leading, but only by a half game over the Golden State Warriors. Warriors back in action, as we mentioned, this coming Thursday when they host the Clippers. The Houston Rockets, meanwhile, they get an extra day when they get to play on Saturday. They got a couple of days, Friday when they host the Timberwolves. So that'll be a fun one coming up Friday when Houston plays host to Minnesota coming up to begin this post-All-Star break part of the season. When we return, we've broken down the Western Conference. We're going to look back now at the Eastern Conference. Another team, a little bit of a surprise up at the top there. The Toronto Raptors on just as much fire as Houston is. The Cavaliers, the new look Cavs, is it enough to maybe topple these teams, topple Golden State, or is it enough to keep LeBron? Plus, if the Celtics peaked too early or not here this season. It's all coming up in a little bit here in the Cheap Seats.
This is Ryan Pierce, host of Completely Serious here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Completely Serious, where we talk about sports and have fun with great guests. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you'll never miss an episode of Completely Serious. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
I was lightning before the thunder.
Welcome back inside the Cheap Seats here on the Public House Media Network. Jon Lauder alongside Christian Heimall. The maiden voyage of the Cheap Seats, where we sit all the way up at the top where people get spit on, and we give you sports from our perspective. Make sure you listen on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spreaker, you name it, we're there. We're like all the other podcasts. You'll find us, and you can also always get more info on the Public House Media website, thephmedia.com. Make sure to like our Cheap Seats Facebook page, and when you go there, don't just like the page, Christian. You got to answer the daily poll question. Who wins the Eastern Conference? Now, it says here the Cavaliers or the field. It's really LeBron James or the field. I don't really care about the rest of the Cavs. You could put me, my grandma, my dog, and a homeless guy up there with LeBron, and they've got a real good shot to take on the field. So it's really LeBron versus the field, but that's just my humble opinion. But we're going to talk about the Eastern Conference now. We mentioned the Western Conference in the last segment and how Houston is leading the conference, which we would not have expected. And it's another surprise in the East, Christian, the Toronto Raptors leading the Eastern Conference. Dwayne Casey is my pick right now for Coach of the Year. Toronto's 25 games above 500. They're 24-4 at home. They're 25-7 in the Eastern Conference. They've won 9 out of their last 10 and a 7-game win streak going into the All-Star break. A tremendous start to the season for Toronto. But the question always is, can they beat Cleveland in the playoffs?
And that really is kind of the big question. A lot of it obviously depends on seeding, and you're absolutely right about Dwayne Casey. I love what he's done in Toronto. This is a team and a franchise that just a couple of years ago, it's so funny with social media and everything. Now that Facebook has like these memories you can look back on, it was literally like 6 years ago last week that the Raptors fans were cheering for Jeremy Lin to hit a game-winning shot against them in Toronto, and to have Toronto be able to come back and to be able to do what they've done. And you look at some of their wins, John, over these 7. There's only really been one close game. Let me read some of these numbers to you and scores for you. They're to start this 7-game win streak. They beat Portland at home 130-105. They beat Memphis at home 101-86. Beat Boston at home 111-91. Beat the Knicks at home 113-88. Beat the Hornets on the road 123-103. Their only real close game was against Miami, a 115-112 win, and then they go to Chicago and blow out the Bulls 122-98. Now, no real world beaters there in that group, except for the Celtics, who have been struggling a lot. But you look at what Toronto has done, and they are blowing people out like they should be against lesser opponents, and that to me is a huge sign of a team that understands how good they are. When you can beat the teams that you know you should, and you beat them convincingly, that to me shows just how talented this team is and the mindset that Dwayne Casey has them in.
And if anybody doesn't think that coaching matters in the NBA, first of all, you clearly haven't watched the Spurs for the last 15 or so years. Mm-hmm. But you look at this Raptors roster, it's not great. I mean, who
surprises you? Like Kyle Lowry? I mean, they don't really have many great guys on that squad.
No, and Lowry is having not a great year for him. I mean, he's only averaging 16 points a game, which is kind of, ho-hum. Only 6.5 assists per game. Now, DeRozan has been spectacular. In my opinion, he's not the MVP, but certainly should get some votes. But, Serge Ibaka, 12 points a game. Jonas Valanciunas, 12 points a game. CJ Miles, 10 points a game. And that's it. They've got 5 players in double digits, but only 2 of them averaging above 15 points a game, yet they're 25 games over 500. So clearly, the message that Dwayne Casey's bringing in his squad has helped a ton. The defense has been excellent for Toronto this year. And again, the East is wide open. If there's any year that Toronto's going to get it done, this will be the year. Because Boston next year, knock on wood, you've got Gordon Hayward back. Who knows what's going to be with Cleveland. If LeBron stays, they're still going to obviously be a threat. Philadelphia seems to be a year or 2 away. This, to me, is the year for Toronto. They're either making it now or they're not making it. That's how I'm looking at it.
John, you kind of took the words out of my mouth with regards to defense. They're the second best defensive team in the East in terms of points per game, giving up just over 103. Steals, meanwhile, they're one of the top 10 teams in the league in steals per game at just over 8. They're one of the top teams in the league in terms of blocks, and that is because of Serge Ibaka, who has had a little bit of a career resurgence with them since leaving Oklahoma City. They rank second in the league at 6 blocks per contest. Their turnover differential is very solid. Their assist-to-turnover ratio is great at just under 2 assists for every turnover that they commit. They play sound, fundamental basketball. Listen, you and I are both college basketball fans. We love the way the game is played at that level, and we'll talk a little bit about it coming up. But to me, the best way to win games in the NBA, because of how much it's changing to a three-point shooting and outside shooting, a finesse style of game, if you can play strong, solid defense on the ball with guys like Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, which might be, by the way, because Patrick Beverley is no longer there, Houston, might be the best combination of defensive guards in the NBA right now, you're going to win games. And that to me is what has made them so impressive. I know it's a game where we don't care about defense. I mean, we just had the All-Star game last night. Nobody cares about defense in that game as kind of an epitome of what the NBA is. But when it comes down to it, when you think about some of the most important moments in some of the championship games, think about it. Yeah, we give a lot of credit to Kyrie Irving for winning the Cavs a championship, but if LeBron doesn't chase guys down and get a block, that's not a championship for Cleveland there. So defense is huge still in today's game, and nobody's playing better defense right now than Toronto.
And forget LeBron, if Kevin Love doesn't stop Steph Curry. I mean,
exactly.
Kevin Love, he's a terrible defender. So, Sure, the league is about scoring, but you need defense in the big moments. And Toronto clearly seems to have that. Breaking down the Eastern Conference here inside the cheap seats, Jon Lauder, Christian Heimall with you on the Public House Media Network. Now, not to rain on Toronto's parade, because we've just spent the last 3 minutes giving them tons of credit, But I think one of the biggest reasons why they've done so well so far this season, especially in the East, is because the East is kind of terrible. I mean,
that's putting it nicely.
Yeah, other than Cleveland, other than Boston, there's not a whole lot there, and even Boston and Cleveland have not been tremendous. The Cavaliers obviously were awful at the beginning, tremendous for about 20 games, and then they were awful again. So Kobe Altman decided, let's just trade the entire team and see what happens. You bring back Rodney Hood, George Hill, Larry Nance Jr., Jordan Clarkson, and look, for a couple of games, they look like world beaters, but it's 2 games. I think people got way too excited. You got Stephen A. Smith coming out saying, they're going to, win 40 straight games and win the NBA championship. I mean, some people were freaking out a little bit too much over, just 2 games. I'm just not sure where Cleveland's at because none of these players, surprise, surprise, are Kyrie Irving. Imagine, Christian, if LeBron and Kyrie were on the same team.
Well, yes. I mean, that would be unfair, obviously. But then again, imagine if Kyrie Irving had Gordon Hayward to play with now this season.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's part of it kind of goes hand in hand. But here's where I find listen, I'm not going to go Stephen A. Smith here and say they're going to win 40 games, but when the Cavaliers, since these trades, they've had a couple of big wins. Obviously, there was a clutch win, LeBron hitting a buzzer beater to beat Minnesota at home before the trade deadline. Then they go on the road and they beat Atlanta by 16, as they should. But they absolutely demolished the Celtics. And then they come away with a big win against Oklahoma City. And both of those games are on the road. And that is a key part of this, too, for me, is the fact that when you can win games, and these guys haven't played, they didn't play together at all, and they go on the road and they win 3 straight heading into the All-Star break. That is a huge thing for this team, for this mindset, for LeBron James to be happy, for the rest of Cleveland to be happy, for these players to sit there and say, you know what? These are the guys that we're going to do this with, and we're confident we can do it. For a guy like George Hill, for Rodney Hood, for Larry Nance Jr., who, by all accounts, was an incredible talent waiting in the wings for the right pieces to be put around him in Los Angeles, and now he already has that. This is impressive to see, for the way this new look squad has started off, you could not ask for a better situation, not only for the short term for Cleveland, but for the long term as well.
Look, You clearly have more confidence in Cleveland than I do, because for me, yes.
You've got the best player in the world. Why would you not have confidence?
Okay, that's true, but I feel like we're right back where we were the first time LeBron was in Cleveland. Now, I'm not saying that this team is as bad as some of those, okay, where, Delonte West was their second best player, okay? It's not that bad, but they still don't have a proven number 2. You're right back where you were before. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. George Hill, Rodney Hood, Clarkson, these are not proven number 2 players, okay? They have the ability to go off for 25 points in a game, but it's just not consistent enough. And look, those wins were nice, okay? Very good win against Boston, very good win against OKC, and yes, they were on the road. But you could easily attribute that to LeBron's happy because now the team has just changed a bit. It's younger, which is great. But how is that going to manifest itself for the rest of the season and then into the playoffs? Without a proven number 2 scorer, again, it's going to fall on LeBron like it does every year. He's going to have triple-doubles all the time in order for this team to be successful. And I just don't know, with all the miles on LeBron's body and all of the effort that he has to expend come the playoffs. Now, granted, in the regular season, he goes through the motions a lot. That's been obvious. But I just don't know if this team can do what it needs to do without a proven number 2.
It's going to be interesting to see, and you're right. I mean, that's kind of the big question is who is that number 2 guy? When you're talking about Golden State, you're talking about Steph Curry, and then you're talking about Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, and when you're talking about Houston, you're talking about James Harden, then Chris Paul. As we were talking about earlier, Clint Capella is right there. When you talk about Boston, you've got Kyrie Irving, you've got even Jaylen Brown has started, at the start of the year was incredible. Jason Tatum is a great candidate for Rookie of the Year. Al Horford is there. If Gordon Hayward, somehow, if Gordon Hayward was able to come back before the playoffs this year, that makes Boston that much more dangerous. And that's the part that we talk about when we talk about the Celtics here is, did they peak too early? And I really question, it's not often that I've questioned Danny Ainge over the last few years because he's made some brilliant moves, but Danny Ainge not doing anything at the trade deadline may have hurt this Boston Celtics squad, because I do think a little bit that they peaked too early here this season.
Well, and that seems to be Danny Ainge's MO, is standing pat at the trade deadline, and is that the right decision? This is not the first time that Celtics fans, people in the media have wondered, did he do the right thing? And it's interesting when you look at Boston's squad, very well rounded. 7 different players scoring on double figures. Obviously, Kyrie Irving leads it. That's fine. But ironically enough, this team, though definitely better, kind of has a makeup almost like when Kyrie didn't have LeBron in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. It's better. I'm not saying it isn't better. No doubt it's better. But it's Kyrie and then everybody else is a step down.
Right.
And now, look, you've got a far superior coach, no doubt. Brad Stevens may already be the best coach in the league, not named Popovich. But, again, like you said, did they peak too early? Is there enough? I'm not sure. Because, again, other than Horford and Irving, everybody else is super young. Smart, Rozier, Tatum is a baby. I'm 11 years older than he is. Jaylen Brown. I mean, some of these guys still can't change their own diapers yet. So, this team is super, super young, and I think that could bite them in the playoffs. But at the same time, you do have Brad Stevens, and that can make a huge difference.
So we started off this segment here, John. You brought up the poll question, and fans, if you want to check it out, or listeners, you want to check it out and vote for it, please do visit our Facebook page at The Cheap, facebook.com/cheapseats. Check us out there. You can find every show listed there. You can find every poll question listed there as well. Cleveland Cavaliers or the field in the Eastern Conference as we head down the stretch.
Yeah, and again, it really should be LeBron versus the field. But yes, Cavs versus the field. Me personally, I'm going with the field. I think this is it for LeBron. I think he does not make the finals, and he takes his talents elsewhere, probably to LA or maybe to the Warriors, and they beat every team 150-0 and go 82-0. I don't know, but to me, they don't make the playoffs, and he rides into the sunset somewhere else to finish up his career.
I'm hesitant to agree with you only because, as I said earlier, he's the best player on the planet, and I can't count that out. But at the same time,
I don't really know how long this honeymoon phase is going to last. I mean, this All-Star break may have come at the worst possible time for LeBron and the Cavaliers. So simply because of that, and because of how well the Raptors are playing, and the Celtics might get Gordon Hayward back, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to take the field here in this one, but you guys, our listeners, you decide as well. Visit us on Facebook.com, search The Cheap Seats, and vote for our daily poll question here today. Who do you got winning the Eastern Conference, the Cavaliers or the field? Coming up in just a little bit, we'll talk NCAA basketball, Major League Baseball as well, and a new segment to a brand new show coming up in The Cheap Seats.
This is Katie, co-host of Coffee with Keith and Katie here on Public House Media. Once you are done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Coffee with Keith and Katie, where we talk about the adventures of our daily lives and relationship. A new show comes out every Tuesday and Friday at 8:30 p.m. Central. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Coffee with Keith and Katie. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Welcome back inside the Cheap Seats, part of the Public House Media Network. Christian Heimall, Jon Lauder, your hosts here on this maiden voyage of the Cheap Seats. Again, we're going to be here 3 days a week. Well, Johnny and I won't be here 3 days a week, but the show will. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all those other fun podcast entities, whichever you may be listening to. You can find us there. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, a new show comes out. Johnny and I are here every single Monday for you guys, talking sports in a way that is for the common fan, I guess, would be the proper way to put it. We're those guys that sit up in the bleachers and make fun of even the ball boys. So as we move forward here into this week's show, John, one of the biggest things and the best parts about this winter so far has been the college basketball season. It's been an insane year where you look through the top 10, the top 25, it's shuffled around so much. There are names you don't recognize. And then probably for me, what's most exciting is that teams like Duke and Kentucky are so far off the radar that we may be talking about them as round of 32 exits this year, if not sooner.
Well, it's always good when Duke is struggling, Christian. That's a joy for all of America. But yeah, it's been just a crazy start to the year for sure. When you look at teams like Cincinnati and Auburn and Xavier, Virginia, all the way at the top, nobody expected that. Nobody thought that was going to happen, and it's been a crazy year thus far, but that's a good thing because parity, we talk about how, leagues like the NBA don't really have the parity we're looking for. College basketball is the exact opposite, and I think this is the most parity we've seen in a while, and that's going to make for a great NCAA tournament.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you look at some of these team names that are up here, and just look through the top 10. I mean, Virginia, if you haven't been paying attention for the last couple of years, you don't know how good Virginia is defensively, so they're not big of a surprise. Michigan State, obviously, Tom Izzo, Miles Bridges, in my opinion, the best player in the country. Villanova, they're at number 3, just national championship a couple of years ago, but they're even not used to being one of those quote-unquote blue bloods. But after them, after the top 3, you mentioned Xavier, you mentioned Cincinnati, Purdue, what Matt Painter has done, and here's what I don't. Why in the world is Texas Tech ranked 7th in the country? There's
no sense.
Out of nowhere, Texas Tech, and then Auburn. Bruce Pearl is doing something incredible there with the Tigers and turning them into one of the great stories of the year. I mean, even further down the list, John, you look at some of these names. Rhode Island at 16, Tennessee, the Tennessee Volunteers, and we're talking the men's basketball team, not the women's basketball team.
That's right.
Is ranked 18th in the country. Texas A&M is up there. Nevada at 24. I mean, even Arizona State is having a resurgence this year.
And Rhode Island's been tremendous now. They did just lose this past weekend, but the two that really stand out to me are Auburn and Texas Tech. If I had told you that Kansas and Kentucky would not be in the top 10, but Auburn and Texas Tech would be, you would not believe me. Chris Beard's done an amazing job with the Red Raiders. Texas Tech really hasn't been good since Bobby Knight, and that was, over a decade ago at this point. Bruce Pearl, I hope he's renting in Alabama because I don't even think he stays another year at Auburn because of the job he's done. Just that's a program that, has been playing SEC basketball since, the 30s, and I think they've won one SEC championship in over 80 years. So it's just been such a weird season thus far, and you look at the teams like a Kentucky, like a Duke, it looks like the one-and-dones are not really working out the way these teams want. I think a lot of these, yes, Power 5 teams, but not as high-profile Power 5 teams are really taking a lot of their notes, taking a lot of their thoughts from the mid-majors that we've seen be so successful. The Butlers, though they're not really mid-major anymore. The VCUs, the Wichita States, teams like that built themselves up. They did it through great point guard play, experienced players that were around for 4 years, that grew together as a group. And you're seeing a lot of that with these teams. Virginia has no stars. There's nobody on that team that's really NBA worthy. Cincinnati, Xavier's got a couple of very talented players, but Auburn, a lot of these teams, they don't have players that jump out at you. They don't have the Marvin Bagley that Duke has. They don't have some of those other star players, but together they've come as a unit. And I think that's right now what really is providing the success in college basketball.
Obviously, I mean, those kids are great, but I mean, even more so for that, and you brought up Chris Beard, and we talked about Bruce Pearl, but college basketball is so much more a coach's game, and I think coaching in college basketball might be the most important aspect of a quality team. When you look up and down the lineup or up and down these teams, I mean, look at Rhode Island with a Hurley at the helm. You look at obviously Cincinnati with Chris Mack, Wichita State with Greg Marshall, even as you mentioned, Chris Beard at Texas Tech. Obviously, Jay Wright, what he's turned Villanova into, and so on and so forth. You just keep going down the line, and these are great coaches who have figured out ways to build their programs in those type of ways. I mean, even Tom Izzo, Michigan State's never been much of a one-and-done school, and we talk about Michigan State and Tom Izzo as one of the greatest NCAA tournament coaches of all time, and it's because he grows that experience. He builds that experience. Now, listen, when it comes time for March Madness, we're a little less than a month away from Selection Sunday. When it comes time for that, we know Coach Krzyzewski, Roy Williams, Bill Self, the Blue Bloods are going to figure it out for at least a couple of games. But the question is how long can they actually go? And, I mean, John, I'm going down these conference leaderboards. Auburn leads the SEC, and Kentucky is under 500 in the SEC. Big Ten is being led up by Michigan State, but Ohio State is right there as well. Purdue is right there. The Big 12 is led, as we've talked about already, by Texas Tech. Like this is a year where as much as we may think the Blue Bloods are going to figure it out, I don't think Kentucky makes the tournament, number one. Number two, it wouldn't surprise me at all if North Carolina and Duke are both gone before we get to the Sweet 16. Same with Kansas, for that matter. I mean, it's one of those seasons where even Clemson is playing better in the ACC this year.
And Kansas wins the Big 12 regular season every single year, and it looks like they might not this time around. And that in itself is crazy. So you're seeing different teams. You're seeing coaches that have come in, and right away they've changed the culture. And I think that's an underrated element that a new coach brings to the table. It's about a culture change as well at some of these schools. Maybe basketball's been put to the side, or maybe the bigger focus has been on football, or there just hasn't been the right mix. And these coaches are bringing in the right culture, the right sort of thought process of winning, and it's clearly making a difference when you look at, again, the Auburns, the Texas Techs. St. Mary's has been excellent this year. It just the top 25 is crazy right now. Arizona State at the beginning of the year was tremendous. Now they've dropped off a little bit, but they are a team that's got great three-point shooting. It can get hot at any time. But yeah, you talk about Kentucky, they're not going to make the tournament, and it shows you that sometimes the one and done is not always the best way to go.
It certainly does. I mean, and I've never thought that, because when you look at some of these teams that have won so well, I mean, really not since the Fab Five in Michigan, where it was truly a group of freshmen that led a team that far, and even those guys struggled, obviously, with certain points of their careers. But
yeah,
when
Chris
you
Webber couldn't tell how many timeouts.
Exactly. But I mean, you go throughout the course of history, and it's usually a team that has that seasoned, that veteran leadership on the floor, which is so successful. Now, here's what I love, John, and this has been happening for a couple of years. Again, we're talking college basketball here in the Cheap Seats. Christian Heimall, Jon Lauder here as part of the Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Don't forget, check out our Facebook page and check out the daily poll question today. Who comes out of the Eastern Conference, the Cleveland Cavaliers or the Field? But we're talking college basketball here. And John, about a week ago, the NCAA Selection Committee, a couple weeks ahead of Selection Sunday, announced that if the tournament started today, what the top of their bracket would look like. And the number one seeds, Virginia, Villanova, Xavier, Purdue. Now, things have obviously changed a little bit with Purdue dropping off since these seedings came out. But this is one of my favorite things that they have done, is because now coaches start to see where their teams are, and they can start coaching against expectations for some of their teams. Because to me, that is one of the biggest Achilles heels for some of these teams up in the top 25, is once you start drinking your own Kool-Aid a little bit, is how do you prevent yourself from stumbling and maybe getting an upset. And so as I look at these top four seeds as they announced them last week, there's only really one team that kind of concerns me, and it is Villanova, simply because they are the team that is most susceptible, I think, to drinking their own Kool-Aid. It's nothing against Jay Wright, but you look at guys like Jalen Brunson and Michael Bridges. They were freshmen when they won the national championship. They haven't really had to be part of a rebuilding program or trying to get to that point where there's a really difficult loss. This is the most they've been tested this year with some of their tough games, including that loss to St. John's. So I'm a little concerned about Villanova there at a number one seed. I do think they ultimately still get it, but they're, along with that and the fact that they're such a heavy three-point shooting team, they probably scare me most out of those four squads that the NCAA Selection Committee talked about last week.
Yeah, if I had to pick right now, my 4-1s would be Virginia, Michigan State, Xavier, and Villanova. But to me, at least 6 other teams have a shot: Cincinnati, Purdue, Ohio State, Auburn. And despite their struggles, I do think Duke and Kansas, if they went out or start getting hot right now, they could certainly get a 1 seed just, on pedigree alone. I don't think St. Mary's or Gonzaga will have enough. Playing in the West Coast Conference, for the most part has not been in their favor. Obviously, Gonzaga was a 1 last year, but this Gonzaga team is not as good as last year's. I'm not as concerned about Villanova as you are. Yes, the three-point shooting really hasn't been there, but every team, all the way up to the Golden State Warriors, the kings of three-point shooting, have, parts of the season where they go cold. It's just part of the deal. I'm not that concerned. I'm more concerned actually about their defense. They're in the sort of the 40s and 50s nationally, which is not great for a team that's ranked in the top 3. But Jay Wright's a fantastic coach. They've got really talented players. In Bridges, Pascal. Brunson's one of the best players in the country. So they've got enough. It's just, can they get back to shooting well from behind the arc, and can they keep that going throughout? and they've got plenty of competition with Xavier in the Big East. I mean, Xavier is a very talented team. Chris Mack is probably one of the underrated coaches in college basketball. But to me, come the Elite Eight, the Final Four, the Sweet 16, I'm still expecting Villanova to be there. Would it stun me if they weren't there? No, but it wouldn't stun me if any of these teams, any of the 10 teams I just talked about, could win this thing or lose in the round of 32, or even some of them in the round of 64. That's how crazy this year has been.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I personally, and this is just because of watching some of their games back and forth, I think Xavier ends up winning that Big East tournament. I don't know if it's because they beat Villanova in the championship or because maybe the Cats get caught a little bit earlier in the Big East, but I do think ultimately Xavier wins. I think they get a higher seed. If not, maybe they're like Xavier's the third number 1 seed and Villanova's the fourth number 1 seed, whatever it might be. But you're absolutely right. I mean, these teams in the top 10, all of them could easily win it. I mean, I'm not that sold on Virginia because as great of defense as they are, as we've seen over the last couple of years, they struggle to score the basketball.
Yeah, they can't score.
Yeah, ultimately it is about scoring more than your opponent. I mean, that is the ultimate goal of the game, and they struggled scoring sometimes. So when they get up against like an Oklahoma in the NCAA tournament, it'll be interesting to see. When they get up against Purdue, it'll be interesting to watch. But I mean, I'm really, really interested to see. Of course, a lot of this will deal with tournament time, conference tournament, as we have a couple of weeks to go before we get there. Listen, if Kansas runs the table and wins the Big 12, you know they're going to be a 1 or a 2 seed. If Duke runs the table, wins the ACC, they'll probably be a 1 seed, as you mentioned, on pedigree alone. So, if a team like Auburn bounces for whatever reason, they get caught in the first round of the SEC tournament, who knows how that all works out. But it's going to be interesting to watch. I think it's a great thing that the selection committee is releasing this. It's a lot of fun to be able to talk about. It's another debate for guys like you and I, where we can sit there and go, oh, look, last week on the 3 line, they had Clemson, Texas Tech, Michigan State, and North Carolina on the 3 line. There's no way that we can debate if North Carolina is going to hang on to a 3. We can debate if Michigan State should be a number 1 seed. Should Auburn be a 2 seed? Those type of things. We can all debate it and whatnot, but when you look at it, when it all comes down to it, it's about the tournament, and I still think the conference tournament is the biggest indicator of NCAA tournament success for some of these teams, just because when you're playing on back-to-back nights, it is so difficult. We see it. John, you and I are mid-major guys. I mean, we went to a mid-major school. We've both worked for mid-major programs. When you come tournament time and you've got to try to win 3 games in 3 days, it is so difficult to do for these teams. And then when you finally see the conference tournament, you'll see which of these teams have what it takes, the mental mindset to be able to go out and win an NCAA tournament.
And that's why a team for me like Michigan State is my pick to win the whole thing. I think they've got not only the best roster in college basketball from top to bottom, but not only are they strong offensively, they're strong defensively. And that's the biggest key to me, because you talked about Virginia, amazing defensive team, but their games kind of look like if you've ever seen like a 2nd or 3rd grade rec game where there's just tons of missed shots and the final score is like 10-8. That's basically all of Virginia's games. They just struggle so much to score the basketball, despite how good they are offensively. I don't know if they have enough. Despite how good they are defensively, I don't know if they have enough offensively. Michigan State, they've got that complete package. They're my pick to win the whole thing.
They've also got, in my opinion, the best player in the country. I had a chance to watch Michigan State a couple of weeks ago.
Bridges is.
In my opinion, he's a left-handed Draymond Green. That is how talented he is, and you don't get really see it on TV when you watch it in person. I watched him at Iowa a couple weeks ago when the Hawkeyes, who were a team that at that point was below 500, had Michigan State down by 7 with like 4 minutes to play. Bridges defensively, and it wasn't just in the half court, it was full court defense that he was able to play. And then from the very next game to go out and hit a big-time 3 against Purdue at home. The kid is incredibly talented, and Tom Izzo, widely regarded as the best NCAA tournament coach in the country there at Michigan State. I agree with you. I think they were my pick at the start of the season to win the whole thing. I'm sticking with them, obviously. I'm never going to go away from that once I make that pick, but they're a fun team to watch. That being said, they're one of those teams that could easily be out come Sweet 16 time.
For sure. You're listening to the Cheap Seats here on the Public House Media Network. Jon, Lauder, Christian, Heimall. Lots of great college basketball stuff on the way, but we've got some baseball to talk about. It's almost baseball season. I know you're excited.
It is baseball season. Spring training.
Yeah,
it's here.
Right. Well, I'm just trying to avoid it because I'm not a big baseball guy, but you are, and we got to talk baseball because it's important. It's the national pastime for a reason. So when we come back, we'll break down some baseball coming up. I've still got basketball on the brain. We'll talk about the free agency being slow. Obviously, players aren't happy about it. Owners don't really seem to care, and I don't really blame them. Justin Verlander throwing some shade at the Yankees, which is always a good time. Then the pace of play. Major League Baseball wants to speed things up. Are their ideas good? Are there other ideas? We'll break it all down coming up here inside the Cheap Seats.
This is Sam Kirby, host of Cinema Stories here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Cinema Stories, where we hang out and just talk movie and TV news and reviews, and it's awesome. A new show comes out every single Tuesday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Cinema Stories. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Give it up, hey. Give it up, hey. Give it up, hey. Give it up, hey.
You're in the cheap seats way up high where the airplanes give us haircuts. Christian Heimall and Jon Lauder here with you as part of the Public House Media Network. The voice of the common fan, as we like to say here, giving you the fun banter that you can only find where the beer is frozen because of how high up we are. We've talked NBA, we've talked college basketball. John, I know you're not a huge guy, but you know me, and this is one of my favorite times of the year. Spring training has opened up. Valentine's Day this year was the day pitchers and catchers reported, so I was in a great mood the entire day, as many guys weren't. But it's a great week. It's an opportunity for us to talk baseball, and after a winter which has been, and pardon the pun, it's been cold in Major League Baseball this whole winter because very few free agents, really since the Giancarlo Stanton trade from Miami to New York, there hasn't been much going on in the way of baseball and guys moving places. Obviously, you've seen teams like the San Francisco Giants make some good trades, the Milwaukee Brewers signing Lorenzo Cain, but up until this past week when Yu Darvish signed with the Cubs, it's been a very quiet offseason in the world of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, and players obviously are not happy about it. Tony Clark has sent out some very strongly worded letters, as if it's the 1920s. But the owners have nothing to feel sorry about as far as I'm concerned. Major League Baseball Players Association agreed to the current CBA. I wouldn't be overpaying these guys either. Contracts have gotten insane in baseball. They're insane in pretty much all the sports at this point. Most of these guys are overpaid. Not all, but most. And look, if I would not want to give J.D. Martinez 5 years and $150 million, I don't care what Scott Boras wants him to get. Okay, I'd love Scott Boras to be my agent to get as much money as humanly possible, but it doesn't mean the owners have to agree to that. A lot of these teams want to get below the luxury tax threshold. I mean, for heaven's sakes, if the Yankees of all teams want to get below the luxury tax threshold, that tells you all you need to know. These teams don't want to spend money unnecessarily, and the idea of trying to grow from the bottom up is an idea we've seen over and over and over again. The Yankees in the late 90s and early 2000s built from the ground up with the core four. We just saw the Houston Astros, for heaven's sakes, with so many of those players, homegrown talent. So spending money upon money on free agents is not always the way to go. And it's been a slow free agency, but for me, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, there weren't that many really good free agents. And second of all, just because you're the best of the bunch this offseason doesn't mean you deserve $30 million a year. I think Yu Darvish was overpaid. I wouldn't have given him that contract. Yes, he's a good pitcher, but he has not looked great in the postseason. But look, the Cubs have the money. They wanted to go for it, and why not if it's not my money? But to me, the slow free agency is just because there wasn't as much talent, and a lot of these guys, not surprisingly, have sort of overinflated egos and think higher of themselves than the owners and the general managers do.
Listen, I'm not going to disagree with you there. I think one of the biggest reasons, as much as people want to blame the players and the agents want to blame the GMs for not wanting to actually answer phone calls, because these agents have been trying like crazy to get guys on the phone. They're just not answering. As much as GMs want to blame the players and the agents for asking for too much money, there are two people that you need to blame, in my opinion. And one is in Chicago, one is in Houston, and that's Theo Epstein and the GM of the Cubs and the GM of the Houston Astros. For guys, these are guys who, as we have seen it, if this is what Philadelphia 76ers fans are waiting for. This is the process.
That's right.
You bite the bullet for a couple of years, you stockpile draft picks, you make some trades that are best for your cap space, and then you draft tremendously young players. You sign them to long-term deals that you have control over for a number of years. You win within that 5-year period, and then you restart the process again. I mean, you mentioned the Astros. George Springer, Jose Altuve, Carlos Correa, all those guys were under contract. Evan Gattis have been under contract since they were drafted.
Alex
Bergman, Lance McCullers. I mean, they only really went out and made a couple of small trades here and there to really fix up their starting rotation because
Dallas Keuchel.
Dallas Keuchel, Justin Verlander and Garrett Cole this offseason with regards to the actual trades, but they've done a tremendous job even in Chicago with Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, Addison Russell, Javi Baez, Kyle Schwarber for that matter. I mean, they've done a tremendous job. The really only part where the Cubs and the Astros for that matter, really where any team needs to kind of break the bank, so to speak, is in pitching because it's so rare to find those guys. And so while I agree that Darvish is probably overpaid, this makes the Cubs rotation so much more dangerous when you have John Lester, Yu Darvish, Kyle Hendricks, and then Jose Quintana there. It's an insane rotation to think of. Their bullpen needs some help, but that's the part that I'm not upset about with the Cubs going out and getting a Yu Darvish. The other guys who are out there, JD Martinez, he's a player who, unless you've really followed baseball, he's been hidden away in Arizona for a couple of years. And the fact that as a kid who grew up as a Red Sox fan, it is really bothering me every morning that I wake up and JD Martinez isn't putting on a Red Sox uniform because he's one of those guys that needs to be in that ballpark. He would be an MVP candidate year in and year out. But you're right. The other guys, Mike Moustakas, Jake Arrieta for that matter, they've all probably gone past that spot where they're going to get those giant contracts. So I'm not surprised at all to see them still not there, but at the same time, it's a lot of these GMs saying, you know what, instead of going out and paying $130 million over 5 years, let's draft some kid that we're going to be able to keep for the first 7 years of his career and maybe try to win a championship with him. The Atlanta Braves are doing it down there with Dansby Swanson, so should be interesting to see how things pan out over the next couple of years with the way this free agent class has been going, because next year's interesting. Next year, Mike Trout, Bryce Harper Trout signed the extension, but Bryce Harper becomes a free agent. I'll be interested to see how many GMs take the same path through this year as for next year as well.
Yeah, well, Manny Machado as well next year. So Machado and Harper will probably get, $400 million contracts from the Yankees. But some of the free agents from this year, Moustakas that are unsigned, Jake Arrieta, you mentioned Martinez, Alex Cobb, Lance Lynn. But I did hear and see that the Royals do have an offer on the table for Eric Hosmer, and their GM was quoted as saying, we're not looking to bottom out. We want to try and win as many games as we can every year, and that's why we're looking to possibly give Hosmer, like a 6 or 7 year deal. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, all right, good, then be mediocre for the next 5-6 years. A team like the Royals got to where they did to win the World Series by that youth movement. And as far as I'm concerned right now, that sort of time has passed for them. If I were them, I'd be doing the whole 76ers process thing. If you're not the Yankees or the Cubs or the Astros or the Dodgers or the Red Sox, and there's 3 or 4 other teams, you need to be blowing it up, starting from the bottom, building that farm system. You talked about the Braves with Swanson. That's what these teams should be looking for. Who's going to be the next Houston Astros? Because at this point, it's probably the best way to build your team, unless you're going to be the Yankees and you're going to give Harper $350 million, and that's not something you're going to see from the Miami Marlins or the Arizona Diamondbacks. Some of these smaller market teams will be able to open up their checkbooks, and they're not going to be willing to open up their pocketbooks to give, $300 million contracts. You're just not going to see it. Derek Jeter comes in Miami. Immediately, we got to get rid of Stanton. He's making too much money. The amount of money he's making is absurd. Now, he's a great player. 59 home runs last year. It speaks for itself. But, Miami just doesn't want huge contracts like that, and I don't blame them. That sort of bogs down kind of everything that you're trying to build, especially when you're in a market like Miami. Though Miami itself's not a small market, the Marlins are kind of that smaller market type team, and we've seen this before. They've won the World Series, they get rid of everybody. They win the World Series again, they get rid of everybody. So that's sort of the way I feel like a lot of these teams have to go. Once it seems like you've kind of reached the pinnacle with a certain group, you got to let some of those guys go and then try to build again from the bottom up.
100%. You're absolutely right. And Stanton was making a way too much money, even though the Marlins are probably paying the majority of that here in this trade, because the Yankees somehow, even with Giancarlo Stanton, are still underneath that luxury tax threshold, which is Brian Cashman should just get the GM of the year for the next 3 years based off that deal alone, because it's unfair. But one of the things, John, I mean, I know you're not a big baseball guy, but you and I are both really enjoy when the Yankees struggle, or at least when people are hating on the Yankees. And one guy did it last week with Justin Verlander, throwing some shade towards not only the Bombers, but Chris Russo of High Heat, who said, all due respect to the Astros, there isn't a reason why the Yankees shouldn't be the AL pennant champions and going to the World Series, represent the American League. Verlander quotes that tweet and says, I can think of one talking about the Astros, because they've been kind of a forgotten topic this offseason. They added Garrett Cole, making their rotation that much more dangerous. They haven't changed anything with what was the best offensive lineup in the game a year ago, but everybody still has hopped on this Yankees bandwagon, and it's like it's the late 90s, early 2000s again, where all these 27 championships are coming out of the woodworks.
Yeah, well, the only thing when you try to compare is those teams had a better rotation, and I think that's the part about the Yankees that concerns me the most. And look, you know, Justin Verlander can say whatever he wants because he's made over $200 million. He just won another World Series, and he's married to Kate Upton. So Justin Verlander's life right now is at a 11 out of 10. So he can say whatever he wants as far as I'm concerned. And anytime somebody's arguing with Chris Russo, I love it because there's a reason why that guy's on Sirius. All right, you know, there's a reason why he's on MLB Network. Obviously a legend in the business, but also says a lot of ridiculous things. And it's insane to just push the Astros to the side just because the Yankees got Giancarlo Stanton. Because unless Stanton becomes Ohtani and starts pitching and hitting, there's still an issue with the pitching staff. CC Sabathia had a good season last year, but I really can't imagine him repeating it. You look at Masahiro Tanaka, he's a ticking time bomb with that issue with his arm. Sonny Gray had a really strong year last year, but is he going to keep that up? How will he be in the postseason? Because we're assuming the Yankees make the postseason.
Right,
I would think they're going to. Luis Severino, can he replicate Jordan Montgomery? I'm not saying they have a bad pitching staff, but do they have one that's going to be good enough come the playoffs? And is it going to be good enough to compete with the Astros, who you already mentioned? Have Keuchel, have McCullers, have Verlander, now added Garrett Cole, who, look, has been a little bit up and down the last couple of years in Pittsburgh, but he has not been pitching for a team with the kind of offense that Houston has. So the Yankees certainly have a better bullpen than the Astros do, but you can say that for most teams when you're throwing out guys like Robertson, Canely, Chapman, etc. But to me, the pitching is where the Yankees are going to have to focus a lot of their effort. And I would not be surprised if Mr. Wheel and Deal himself, Brian Cashman, isn't making a deal at the deadline to bring in some extra pitching help, because I do think they're going to need it.
Listen, they've got the best 7-8-9 combination in the game with Robertson, Betances, and Chapman there.
Yes.
There's no question. If you're not beating the Yankees come the seventh inning, you're not going to win that game. But their pitching staff, you're absolutely right. They've got great names on there, but I think it was 2014, the Red Sox had a great pitching staff as well, and then that became the chicken and beer fiasco of 2014. Right. My bigger question with the Yankees, though, is still with this lineup, because yes, you've got the best 3-4 combination with Judge and Stanton, whichever way you want to put them. Greg Bird is kind of a all or nothing guy, home run or strikeout. Yep. Brett Gardner at the top of the lineup isn't that great anymore, so you're going to put Didi at the top of the lineup. Gary Sanchez is another one of those guys that's kind of all or nothing. Aaron Hicks, I don't trust him out in center field, so are you going to put Stanton in left and let Gardner play center field more often than not? Who are you going to have DH? You're going to have Jacoby Ellsbury, who's still under that ridiculous contract that is hilarious still to me to this day. Who's going to play third base for the Yankees? So I think there are still some holes in this lineup, even though 3-4 is the best that you're going to see this year. The question becomes is if you can get around 3 and 4. Listen, I'm never an advocate for this. I hate when the intentional walk, but if you got bases empty and 2 outs, why not walk both Judge and Stanton, put runners at first and second, and just get a ground ball to end the inning? All it takes is one pitch. I mean, and listen, I know everybody's kind of counting them out, but as much as we talk about how talented the Yankees are, The Red Sox still have Chris Sale. They still have David Price, who he's trying to figure things out. If he does, it makes them that much more dangerous when you can go back-to-back with two incredible left-handers coming in the rotation. And then you look at that lineup as well. If Hanley Ramirez figures his life out, if you've got Mookie Betts, Andrew Benintendi, and Jackie Bradley, probably the best young outfield there is in the game. But we'll still wait and see. And then, of course, Craig Kimbrell in the bullpen, arguably, you could argue that he's the best closer in the game with Aroldis Chapman, if not better, considering that he did win the Relief Pitcher of the Year a year ago. So it's going to be a great season. It's going to be fun to watch, especially in the American League East, because as you and I both know, as much as I hate it, baseball's better when the Yankees are better, and having the Red Sox be right there along with it makes the game so much more fun.
And not to mention, don't the Cleveland Indians still have the AL Cy Young winner?
A little bit, yeah. They've still got a guy, Corey Kluber. Salazar might be out for opening day, but they've still got a very talented team. My problem with them, though, is they lost their guy, Carlos Santana, who went and signed with the Phillies. So, but they'll be fun to watch. They'll be enjoyable, I think, as well. There's so many teams to talk about in Major League Baseball. There's so many great possibilities and stories there. I mean, look, the Angels might be better this year with Trout, with Shohei Ohtani, if he pans out the way they want him to. The Mariners could be better this year. So who knows? It's just, this is why I love this time of year. It makes things so much more fun to talk about.
And maybe the Mets won't have all their pitchers get hurt.
Yeah.
You're listening to the Cheap Seats here on the Public House Media Network. Jon Lauder and Christian Heimall with you. Make sure that you like our Facebook page. It's the Cheap Seats. And also, you got to answer the daily poll question. Who wins the Eastern Conference? Cavaliers or the field? LeBron or the field? And no, not a field like just a bunch of grass. I mean like actual teams, Celtics, Raptors, etc. So make sure that you answer the daily poll question on the Facebook page. And you can also learn more about the show and about all the other tremendous shows on the Public House Media Network by going to thephmedia.com. You can go to the bio page and look at Christian's nice picture. You can also listen to the Press Row podcast, which is Christian's solo project. So there's plenty of good stuff on the phmedia.com. We got one more segment for you. It's the maiden voyage of this segment, because it's the maiden voyage of the show. Mojo Monday. Who's got good mojo? Who's got bad mojo? We'll be doing this each show. I think it's a great idea because, again, who's hot, who's not to a certain degree. And I'm going to let Christian go first because I'm a gentleman and I'm polite like that.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, we were just talking about baseball, and I've got some good mojo for this guy. Tim Lincecum last week had a showcase for more than, I think, 15 Major League teams that were there watching this kid try to come back. He was known as the Freak, former two-time Cy Young winner, who really 2 years ago in 2016 kind of embarrassed himself when pitching for the Angels. He had, if I remember correctly, something like a 9.16 ERA, which was second worst in the league at that point. His highest velocity was 87 miles an hour. But if you followed the Twitter and Instagram freak out in December, there was a picture of Lincecum posted. The kid is absolutely jacked now. It's scary to watch.
Incredible.
And 25-30 scouts watched him, and there were many reports that he was pitching right around 90, 93 miles an hour. And listen, if Tim Lincecum can get back to the Cy Young way that he was, I still think he has the best curveball I've ever seen live. I mean, I'm sure there are people before me who are better, but Lincecum's 12-6 drop is scary to watch. So to have 30 scouts there, to have a lot of people impressed with his improved velocity, if he has that back, plus he still has his curveball, all he needs is one guy to sign him. So going into this week, I think Tim Lincecum's got some good mojo going.
Now, I'm actually going to change this on the fly because that's just the kind of guy I am. I was going to go with some good mojo, but I'm going to just bring some bad mojo. You have to have the opposing viewpoints. Tiger Woods has got some bad mojo going on right now. He was 6 over at the Genesis Open, did not make the cut. The cut was at 2 over. And again, are we ever going to see the Tiger Woods that was so incredibly dominant, winning 14 majors? Obviously, he's trying to get himself back into a golfer that can win major championships. The goal, of course, is to win the Masters in April. I don't think there's any shot of that, but who knows? Maybe he'll surprise us. But right now, Tiger Woods just seems to have bad mojo. There was also the whole issue with that Playboy Playmate of the Year and the article with Donald Trump. They also talked about Tiger Woods in that article as well. So it seems like when Woods takes 2 steps forward, it also ends up being 2 steps back. So some bad mojo right now for Tiger Woods. I think we all would love to see him be that dominant golfer again, because at least for me, that made golf worth watching. Since Woods has fallen off the map, I truthfully have not been a big golf watcher. I know a lot of people still are. It's nothing against the sport, but to me, Woods is that kind of singular figure that really makes golf go. And will we ever see that player again? I think it's unlikely, and right now I think Tiger Woods is working with some bad mojo at the moment.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, and he's going to carry that bad mojo into this weekend with the Honda Classic. First time
right.
He's going to play back-to-back tournaments since the 4th back surgery he had a year ago. So hopefully, I tell you what, I would love to see him get back to that as well, but I don't know if it's actually going to be possible. Well, we appreciate you guys being a part of this, the very first show, the very first episode of the Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Again, you can find us all over Google Podcasts, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker.com. Find us on thephmedia.com. Check out our Facebook page, The Cheap Seats, and vote on the daily poll question, which our guys coming up on Wednesday will recap your results. They'll also give you their daily poll question. John, it's been fun to be here back talking sports again. And you and I will be back every Monday here on The Cheap Seats. Coming up on Wednesday, you've got Jeff Childs, Max Wolpoff. They'll take you guys through to Wednesday and then into Friday with Baxter Colburn and Matt Coyne. Until then, guys, we appreciate you listening. We really appreciate your feedback as well. Don't forget, you can always find us on Twitter at John Lauder, JON_Lauder, LAUDER, or you can find me at Chris Heimall. For John, I'm Christian. We'll see you next time in The Cheap Seats.